Good morning. I am Thomas Holloman. I am representing the Fairhope Library as a volunteer and am interviewing veteran Gerald Johnson, Jerry Johnson, on May 26, 2021 at the Fairhope Library for the Veterans Oral History Collection. So good morning, Jerry. Welcome to the interview.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you.
Now, what branch of service did you serve in, and what was your highest rank?
I began as an enlisted man in artillery. I was commissioned in infantry. I served in special forces as a branch, as well as infantry and military intelligence.
And did you serve in any war or conflict?
Yes, I served in Vietnam, and I served during the confrontation, the initial confrontation with Iran, with a mission in that direction. But I never was deployed, almost.
Very good. And where are you originally from? Where were you raised? Okay. Where did you go to high school?
I was born and raised in Greenville, Alabama, and at age 17, I joined the National Guard. And I have to admit, the reason for joining the National Guard was they had a baseball team that played in summer league, and they had uniforms. They were the only team with uniforms, and I wanted to change from the Greenville team to the National Guard team, so I was agreed to sign up with the National Guard at 17. I joined because a couple of my buddies were playing on the team, and that's as soon as I could, I did, because the baseball season was beginning, and in April they were lining it up.
When did you graduate?
The following year, it would have been 59, and 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, I got on a Greyhound bus and went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for basic training, 8 weeks of basic infantry training. And then after they gave us 2 weeks leave time, and then I went for my artillery training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. But I had learned enough cannoneering to where after 2 weeks they decided that I needed to be a regular Army. They needed help with their school support weapons, and they transferred me to the 13th Artillery with the regular Army guys.
And so, okay, so then you went to where?
Across the post to 13th Artillery, which was a support brigade, I think it was, for the school support. We fired our weapons for the officer candidates, I think it was, for adjusting artillery. And then when they went to the field, they got our weapons, and we went along to hump ammo for them.
So what happened after the 13th Artillery?
I finished my 6 months and returned to Greenville. Decided that I needed to go to college, I wanted to go to college, and I had some offers for scholarships to play ball, and I went to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, to Bethel Junior College, a Baptist junior college, and played basketball.
Yeah.
I stayed there one year, came home and did electrical and plumbing work. Then I came back in basically a year later, and decided to transfer to Troy University, Troy State at that time. And I'd hoped to play baseball and made the team thinking I was going to get a scholarship. They did not have scholarships. I didn't know that. And so I quit the team after being first team first baseman and went out for basketball. They had tryouts, and I made the team. And I told Coach Archer that I had to have some help to be able to stay in school. And he said he didn't have any scholarships, but he'd get me a workship. So that was tuition, books, and fees. and I was in charge of cutting the grass for the practice football field and the first tee of the golf course. And I had two track guys that had workshops, and the athletic director told me, said, here are your two lawnmowers, and if it doesn't get cut, you're going to have to cut it yourself, but you've got two track guys that will cut it. And so having been in the Army, I didn't have any problem getting that detail out there and getting the grass cut. I stayed and graduated from Troy. And my senior year, I took advantage of a new opportunity in the Alabama National Guard, and that was an OCS program, patterned after the.
Now, did you remain in the National Guard the entire time
yes,
you were
I
at
did.
Troy? Yeah.
Even when I went to Kentucky, they transferred me up there to an armored unit.
Yeah.
And one weekend in a tank, I knew I didn't want those, so they put me in a recon unit with a Jeep, and that was a smart move. But yes, I stayed in the Guard the whole time. And I needed that extra money, and I could go down and sweep the armory or wash a truck and get full pay at max or whatever they could pay me for how many drills. And I maxed out on that, and then summer camp was a max out too. But that senior year, they offered this OCS program called the Alabama Academy, Military Academy, Alabama Military Academy. And you could become, after 1 year of training, you could become an officer, a second lieutenant. And we trained at Maxwell Air Force Base at every, I think it was every month. We went there for a long weekend. And we went 2 summer camps. The first one was our junior year at Fort McClellan, Alabama. And our senior was the last year when I graduated in actually it was 1963.
So you graduated and you're a second lieutenant.
And I had needed a job, and I was able in mid-year, since I graduated in mid-year, in January of I guess '64, I got a job in Phoenix City, Alabama, teaching history, which was one of my majors. I coached baseball, basketball, and football down at the junior high school. But it was very hard for a teacher to make a living on what teachers were making at that time. The only way I could get a pay raise was to go get a master's degree. They just didn't give pay raises.
Yeah.
And so I realized I had to do that. Now, how do I do it? That was my problem. So after trying several things, I even looked at the Air Force, qualified for the Air Force, and took all their tests. I wanted to fly. They had bad news for me. I didn't qualify as a pilot, but I did qualify as a navigator. And I said, fine, I'll take it. It's flight pay, that's what I need. I'm money motivated.
But you were in the Army.
I was in the Army National Guard.
Yeah, navigator.
And navigator, and that was fine with me. But they messed up my paperwork, and he told me it needed an extra 30 days to get it straight. They were going to send me to the OTS program, which was no problem. I'd already been through OCS, so it had been a snap. And I told him, I'm sorry, but I don't have the funds to make it another 30 days, and the Army will send me tomorrow. So during the Vietnam War, I could volunteer for 3 years as a reservist on active duty. And that's what I did, and they by then I was a first lieutenant, and anyway, let me back up just a minute. The 2 summers that I was teaching, I found that I could go on active duty for training to courses and make more money than I could work in construction. So the first summer, which was '65, I went to Fort Benning to the Infantry Officer Basic Course and the Airborne course because I had joined the Special Forces Unit at Montgomery, Alabama, the 20th Special Forces.
Well, so you actually got out of the National Guard and became a regular Army.
Well, I became a reservist, a U.S.
Reservist.
U.S.
Okay.
for 3 years only.
Yeah.
And I knew that 1 year would have to be in Vietnam. 'Cause for one thing, I was infantry. You know, I wasn't. I pretty well figured that one out. I was willing to do that 1 year.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, like I said before, I volunteered to go on active duty. I had accomplished a couple of things. I had qualified as an infantry officer, basic officer, and I had qualified in airborne, and in '66 I went to Fort Bragg, qualified in special forces. I got my flash for my special force, fully qualified in special forces. So when '67 rolled around and I finally decided that I wasn't going in the Air Force, and I was working in Birmingham at that time trying to find another field as a draftsman for the Regional Planning Commission. I didn't realize that they wanted me as a planner. They didn't tell me. I'd have probably stayed there, but I'd already volunteered to go in the Army, so I went. And in '67, I was on active duty back to Fort Bragg in the 7th Special Forces Group.
So in '67, you were in the full-time.
Full-time
Yeah.
for 3 years, right. I didn't know it at the time, but there are a lot of things that were peculiar about Vietnam service and all. One, I guess from what they learned in Korea, because I think they sent a whole West Point class of lieutenants over, and most of them got killed or wounded. They could not send you in harm's way to Vietnam, for example, for 6 months. And that's 6 months of my 3 years right there that I had to stay at Bragg with nothing to do, and I wasn't the only one. There were a lot of lieutenants standing around, nothing to do. I mean, we trained, went and jumped, did all sorts of things. But what I did, I was looking for a school, and they wanted to give me Mandarin Chinese, which was a year, and I didn't want to spend a whole year of 3 years in school learning Mandarin Chinese. The other course they had was Ranger School. They had a slot, and they said, "But you don't want that." And I said, "Yes, I do," and I took it, and that was amazing to have.
You were already airborne qualified.
Yes.
Yeah.
But those slots were extremely hard to come by for even a full-time officer on active duty.
Were you a first lieutenant by this?
I was just made first lieutenant. And so I went to Ranger School and completed the course.
Right.
So I was about as qualified as you could get for a lieutenant. And I still had to wait 2 more months to get my 6 months. And I was looking for something to do. And they said, "We've got a levy for Thailand to 46 Special Forces Company, but you have to be a captain." They're all captain levies. And then they looked and saw that I had actually 8 months of National Guard duty. 6.5 of them were as an E5. I made that much rank in the National Guard. So they called me back about 2 weeks later, and I don't think they couldn't find enough. And anyway, it said, "You qualify." So, but I went to Thailand for a year, and I knew it'd be a year, and I figured, okay, I still got time to go to Vietnam. They're not going to let me get by with it. They may have. I really didn't care. So I went to Thailand and was stationed on the Malaysian border. And I was given an 8 attachment. I was an 8 attachment commander, which was the only job I really wanted. And we were training Thai soldiers in counterinsurgency. And one night, good story, it was a weekend, and I just happened to be out at the camp rather than in town. And there was a Twix came in for me. They called me over the Radio Shack, and it basically said, "Move your detachment to Hoi Hin," who I'd never heard of. "Be there Monday morning." Well, I got the team together, and we found out that Hoi Hin was 800 miles north up the peninsula. And it was an old Army post, infantry post that had almost torn down. The ranges were in terrible shape. What we decided to do, okay, we jumped in to that location down there on the south. It was an old Japanese airfield. Well, you can't jump out. So they didn't say how, they just said be there. And this is typical of special forces. They expect you to figure it out. We did. We pooled what little money we had, and we rented a box car. And we put the whole team, and our team box was bigger than anyway, it was a very large box with all our team equipment, which is our radio equipment and so forth like that, the heavy stuff. So we'd had no problem packing everything in there. And we went north, and when we got to that location there, they just uncoupled us and kept going. We just left out there without on our own. So we found the place, and what we were to do, we were in the interim of them getting drill instructors from the state. They were training a Thai battalion to replace a battalion that was in Vietnam. And they had to get this battalion trained in basic training on time for deployment. So we were to go up there not only to give them basic training, but to rebuild the ranges, all those ranges. And they wanted train fire ranges, meaning moving targets and all the hoopla. So, okay, we were up to it, and they gave me a Thai colonel, and he was very nervous because he didn't think that he or we could do that. And I told him that I had 2 engineers in my team, even though they were just E5s, young guys, that if he would do what they needed done, that he would have his ranges. And he did, and they did. And they built those ranges with a lot of improvisation and so forth out of a machine shop downtown.
Yeah.
And got it done. And what we did is we were lucky. The battalion commander had been a platoon leader in Korea, spoke fluent English, understood GIs. And the company commanders were green right out of their West Point, whatever that school was, in Thailand. It was at Thai West Point. They were captains. And then the lieutenants, the platoon leaders, though, they had all been at least E8s during the Korean War. They spoke English. So we were able, they understood us and we understood them. And so what we did is we trained, took the lesson plans and all, and trained their instructors, basically their platoon leaders mainly, at night. And then they would instruct their people during the daytime, and then we would shift off and we would monitor training, hand to hand, everything. The infiltration course, night infiltration, we had whatever we had in the stateside, that's what they got. So that was successful, and the DIs, the drill instructors, finally got there for advanced infantry, so they let us go. Before we even boots hit the ground, they had split my team in half, and I was to take one half, at least I got to pick the half, and we were going to go on a special mission, and all I can say is it was on the Laotian border,
right,
of the north there. And the ambassador got involved, he chickened out, and it never did deploy. And so then I got promoted to captain, and they sent me up on the Cambodian border to a camp way up in the jungle mountains there at a big power dam, Nampoon Dam. But it was down from that was Nakhon Phanom Air Force Base. And it was a big American contingency there, the CIA, you name it, they were all there. So back to when we were at the previous location at Chiang Mai, and I told you it was next to the Burmese border. Probably my best sergeant, he was really sharp, just Army 2 strike for me, but he needed to go back to where we'd been down on the Malaysian border because he had a girlfriend down there and a child, and wanted to go. So we let him go, me and the team sergeant let him go, and he had a 3-day pass. Well, he didn't show up, and that wasn't like him. And he was gone for 2 extra days. We stayed with him on it. He finally showed up, and what had happened was the train he was on, the bandits, as they called them, bandits from Burma, had come across that 30 miles there and had burned cross ties at one end to stop the train. And all they wanted to do is stop it, and then they burned them at the other end to stop it from the other end. And according to my sergeant, and he's a straight shooter, he talked to the Thai police and so forth who were there at the plane, at the train, that the Chinese communists submarines up there to resupply them, and they would come across and do that every once in a while, basically cut the railroad and get that supplies, give them time to get that 30 miles back into Burma.
Yeah.
So we knew about them. And down on the Malaysian border where we were, I forgot to tell you that those were the remnants of the Chinese terrorists that the British eliminated in '61, I think it was. And we had studied all this. And they had reconstituted, and they basically wanted to take the 2 southern provinces of Thailand, combine them with the 3 provinces north in Malaysia into a country. So we knew about that element. And the other one, there were 5 of these in the country.
So where did you get to Vietnam after that?
No. After that, I'm proactive, so there was a Philco Ford site up in those mountains that I'd found, and at 2 o'clock one morning I drove a Jeep over there and called DA, talked to them like they were next door, and asked them if they had any slots for instructors at the Ranger Park, which I knew they did, for captains. And they said yes, and I said, well, send me, and they said, we'll do that. So they sent me to the Ranger Department at Fort Benning, and I was there for a year. The first thing, they have to train you to be an instructor and all, and before I got started, they got a new class of West Pointers. It was the largest class of West Pointers that had ever gone through the Ranger course, over 200, and they needed a second TAC officer, and I had been selected to do that, so that's what I did.
Okay, so you got back to Fort Benning and became an instructor.
Yeah, after that, the colonel made me his operation officer, so he saw I had been an operation officer, and I was only going to be there another 8 months. And so I did that, and he could get us, the Ranger instructors could get any assignment they wanted in Vietnam. He could get it for you.
Yeah.
And we all needed company commands. There was 6 of us leaving at the same time, and we all wanted to go to the 173rd Airborne Brigade. And I got to thinking about it and listening to them there in the operations. That wasn't going to happen. You know, we could get there, but getting a command, no. So I went back to them and volunteered to go to the Delta in the 9th Infantry Division. Well, the division I had triple my chances there. So that's where I went in 1969. Went to Vietnam.
As a captain, and you took over a company?
I did within 2 weeks. The 3rd Brigade, it was only the 3rd Brigade of the 9th. They'd already sent 2 brigades home. So the winding down of Vietnam had begun.
In '69.
In '69.
Where were you in the Delta?
I was in An Province, and I started out in Rakhine, and then Tan An was where I wound up.
Yeah. That how far is that from Saigon?
25 miles.
Yeah.
And I'm 30 miles from Cambodia.
Yeah.
We're right between. That's why we were there, between Saigon and Cambodia.
So you took over an infantry company?
Yes.
And how long were you?
6 months.
You were there 6 months?
Yeah, I was there 6 months. We did some unusual things that we went out to the Plain of Reeds. They were only sending a platoon out there once a month for about a week to help guard an artillery fire support base. It was an old French fort, they called it, but really just a pile of mud. That was about 3 kilometers from the Cambodian border. And I got talked to a young lieutenant that had been out there for a week, and he said there's a lot of work to be done out there, but he said it's too much for one platoon. Said we just tried to stay out of trouble. And I said, okay, that's enough for a company. So I volunteered the company to go out there for a month. And the 3rd Brigade was OPCON to the 25th Division, which was about 25 miles on to the north and east of us. And so we were like the 4th Brigade of the 25th Division. And so everything went through them. And I think they let me go as a guinea pig to see how it worked. And it worked great. What we found out was that they weren't going by canal, traveling by canal, they walking or boat. They were getting off about 200 meters, and they could see at night, or even with the stars, they could see enough reflection off the water to navigate by that on 29 miles of walking. And so it was about 12 inches of water or more, the plain ridge, sort of like the Everglades. And so we used air mattresses to ambush. We'd set up L-size type ambushes with air mattresses, just laying on air mattresses. Yeah. And the time we were there, they never caught on to it, because every night we had work to do. And we would even, since we got a little tactic, so after blowing the bush, as we called it, we'd have the choppers come in to take us out of there, and I'd make them go back into, my guys go back into position and let the choppers leave. And when they do that, the remnants of what was there would come up out of the water, and we'd do it all over again. Finished my change of command, and I neglected to keep one Jeep and a driver so I could go somewhere, you know. I had no assignment. I was just another guy, captain, wandering around with a duffel bag. And so I hitchhiked to the helicopter pad and caught a ride to Brigade. They were not expecting me. I mean, I was done. I was at the old club trying to listen, get a scuttlebutt, think about, you know, what kind of job I can get. And I didn't particularly at that time want a staff job. And I overheard that the brigade commander had turned down 5 West Point captains who were staff officers for that position. And nobody said that it had been filled. So instead of going up to brigade and getting an appointment to see the old man, I went over to find out where his hooch was, and went over and knocked on his door. And he was packing to leave, because he came in country the same, actually came into the brigade the same 6 months I had, but he had already been there 6 months, so his year was over. And he was frantically packing to get out of there.
Short timer.
He was a short timer. And I knocked on the door and I came in, I told him what I wanted, and he didn't ask me to sit down or anything, so we stood there. I told him, and he said, "You got the job," just like that, without asking me. Well, I hadn't thought about it, but he had been over me in a command and control helicopter many, many times, and he knew me better than I knew him. So he knew what he was getting. And then without me saying anything, he said, "Now let me tell you what you got to do." He said, "You've got 1 man up for murder, and you got 4 of them up for armed robbery, and you've got some pot problems." Who didn't have pot problems? He said, "Go get that straightened out." He said, I've got, I think, 6-7 days or something. If you get that straightened out in the next 6-7 days, come back and report to me, and then I'll tell you what I really want you to do. So I investigated that, and all of that was being adjudicated. I had nothing I could do about it. Yeah. And it was a mistake anyway. It was a mistaken identity, and I think because I know that I got the 4 guys back from armed robbery, those charges were dropped. I don't know about the other guy, but I know it was a mistake from what my interview and the team. But anyway, he gave me, he said, "You don't have platoon leaders. I'm going to give you platoon leaders." Well, now, the Ranger Company worked in 5-man, it's supposed to be 6, but 5-man teams. I couldn't send 4, but 5 could work. So we had 6 5-man teams. They worked independently, which is totally different from the infantry company, where we had a whole company on line, and they couldn't move a muscle all night long. You know? These teams, they moved all night long, and that was their defense. So it was Ranger type tactics and raids and ambushes, similar to what we had been doing.
Mostly nighttime.
All night, totally. And if in the Delta, you were compromised after one night. Somebody would see you, and if they see you or you see them, then you got to come out.
After you finished that assignment, did you come back to the States and wrap up your...
We actually were scaling down to go back to the States, but that was a problem. They would not give. We all knew about it, but they would not make an announcement. So we had to continue to do what we were doing, knowing that we were the last ones in Echo Company, 75th Rangers. We were the end of it. We would be going back to the States. They were going to redeploy us back to Fort Lewis, Washington, and disband us.
Yeah.
But I couldn't tell anybody that, but they knew it already. And that's when it got real dangerous, because, and the same thing has happened in Afghanistan and elsewhere. How do you do that? How do you keep fighting and knowing that you're fixing to go home, everybody? And so we had some casualties that I really regret to this day, because it was just unnecessary. We were to go to Cambodia, big deal. And luckily, I was heard, and we were left as the rear guard in Vietnam there. But what that did is it opened up the whole area of operation for our one little team. We could go in places we were not able to go before, because the battalions got first dubs on it, and they'd take up, gobble up all that time. So I took all of my teams and told them, okay, now here's your chance. You can go anywhere you want to go. And so they, start picking. And a couple of them, they picked this one location. Said the last time we were allowed in there, the bad guys were wearing khaki uniforms and wearing Rolex watches. So they weren't VC.
Nope.
And so they wanted to go back, and I said, well, the only way, with that kind of prospects, I know there wasn't supposed to be any NVA left. They were all in Laos and Cambodia, wherever. But you got to go. I'm gonna put 2 teams in there. We're gonna double up. We're gonna have 10 guys instead of 5.
Do you have any artillery support?
That was the one catch. They took all the artillery. They took all of the helicopters. They took everything. They left us one helicopter, but they took everything with them. That didn't bother us one bit. You know why? Because the Navy was there. We had been, the whole 12 months I was in Vietnam, in that part of Vietnam, the Navy was always there every night. There was a Black Pony, which was a fixed wing, I forget, there was a A-10 or something like that. It was a fixed wing aircraft, twin fuselage airplane, little plane. It could carry 5-inch rockets. We didn't have, nobody had 5-inch rockets but them. Carry all the illumination you could ever want, and could stay on station for a long time. And then there was Seawolf, which were Charlie model gunships that worked in a pair, and they had 2.5 or 2.7 inch rockets, but they too had illumination and so forth. So that's who we depended on. We had no artillery, and nobody thought about that except me, because we couldn't have done that, what we did.
No, you had to have some support.
We had to.
Well, were you close enough to the oceans where the naval ships could actually shoot?
No, well, I don't really know the answer to that, but I doubt they wanted to fire over Saigon, because to reach us,
they would have had to fire over Saigon.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. So that never came up.
They wouldn't have done that.
I don't think so.
Would you ever call in a B-52 strike?
Not that far south.
Yeah.
But we had Puff the Magic Dragon there, and that worked very well.
Were you a career military?
Well, that's a good question. When I'd been at the Ranger Department, my colonel there, his West Point colonel, he had recommended me for regular Army. I'd never even considered it.
Yep.
And I sort of half-heartedly said, okay, well, nothing happened. And then I'm in Vietnam, and my new brigade commander, who we got along extremely well, and he realized that I'd been screwed over a little bit in some ways by the staff. That's another story. But he recommended me and I laughed and I said, well, that's already been tried once and it didn't work. Well, about a week later, he called me up there and said, we found your paperwork. And said, raise your right hand. So I didn't have time to do any more thinking of it.
You still a captain at that point?
I was captain.
Yeah.
I became a regular Army officer.
Yeah.
And
but you had to agree to serve some time.
Right, I was for 30 years then.
Yeah, you were in.
but I had 8 years enlisted time before, so I had about 10 years.
So you are a career military United States
I am,
officer.
by the skin of my teeth.
So what was your last rank when you
major?
You got out as a major.
Yep.
What year was that?
That was 86.
In 86.
86.
Well, did you stay with the Special Forces during that?
Well, that's a good story there too. It's not a story; it's a fact. They, after Vietnam, they downsized, especially Special Forces.
Right.
There was animosities and so forth among different factions, and
it was political.
It was very political, and I tried to look up my Special Forces class that I went to school with. And I only found 2 of them. They had either been killed or been rifted out of the Army.
Yeah.
Gone. And then the only thing that saved me was I was regular Army.
Yeah.
I believe. So I basically decided I can't do that. Well, I went back to my original plan, and that is to get a master's degree. So while I was they sent me to the advanced course after Vietnam. Went to the advanced course at Fort Benning, and coming out of it, I was checking on my assignment, and they had an assignment for me as a general's aide in Washington. And at that time, I about decided I just needed to get my master's degree and get out. So that's what I did. I opted for an ROTC assignment. I got one at North Carolina State University in Raleigh.
Good afternoon. I'm Kris Lafferty, and I'm representing the Fairhope Library in this continuing interview of Jerry Johnson on July 15, 2021 at the Fairhope Public Library. This interview is being conducted for the Fairhope Library's Veterans Oral History Collection. At the end of your interview with Tom Holloman, you were transitioning from the Army Reserves into the regular Army and awaiting an ROTC assignment. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I had 5 one-year assignments on active duty. And finally, I was being assigned to a duty of more than a year in time. It was a 2-year assignment, but while I was there, the draft went out, and they extended it to a 3-year assignment, which was okay with me. I was enjoying the assignment. I was a freshman instructor, but when the draft went out, we lost our old cadet corps. They were all draft motivated. Even those who were on scholarship quit. So I was assigned to become a recruiter for ROTC. But in order to do that, I had to first recruit for North Carolina State University. So I worked out of the administration building to go out to the high schools all over North Carolina and recruit for the university and also ROTC. During this time, I had the war was winding down, but there were still responsibilities that had to be taken care of, wartime responsibilities, and a lot of that fell on those of us who were assigned stateside assignments. For example, I had to conduct a military funeral Now, I had been to a military funeral, but I had never conducted one. And I was told that you had an airplane. This was at Fort Bragg. You had an airplane ready with, I think it was 6 young men that I had never met, who will assist you in this ceremony, and 1 bugler. And so you're going to Mississippi. The body had come from Vietnam, but it had gotten lost. And the family was there, and anyway, they were on their way to Mississippi also. So I was to go and take care of this. So we flew down, and as we were flying there, I asked, has anybody participated in a military funeral before? And nobody held their hand except the bugler. And I said, come here, son, you're my expert. And we had a field manual, and so he prompted me through what we were to do. When we landed there, the American Legion took us to the graveside, which military funeral, that's where they all are. Well, it said, well, there's a little change to this. This young man was a Catholic, and they're going to have a Catholic service. They're also going to have a service at the funeral home. So there are going to be 3 services. And you need to participate in all this. Not only are you to be the pallbearers, but you, of course, to fire the rifle salute and the bugle, present the flag. All of these things I pretty well knew that I had to, but I didn't know I was going to have to do that much. So we quickly staked out where everybody needed to be, and I left the bugler in charge of the weapons at the graveside, and we went to the funeral home, and that went smoothly enough until we got to the Catholic church. And as we were going up, and we were pallbearers, and I was behind the coffin, and as we were going up, I was trying to remember, now do we keep our berets, these green berets, keep our green berets on or off? Well, the answer to that is you keep them on, but I didn't do that. I tapped one of them on the backside and told him to take his beret off, and they all immediately followed my instructions. They didn't know either. There was a colonel there to check on me, and that was the only gig I got for the whole thing, the berets. But we finished that, went on out, and the bugler was holding the rifles up for the guys to come pick them up. They grabbed them up, and they were out of sight and all, and the bugler was in position, and the chaplain gave the service and so forth, and we presented the widow with the flag and all, and then the American Legion gave us a party and sent us back on our airplane back to Fort Bragg. Now that was the military funeral, but I also got called for this was harder to do. You'd get called in the middle of the night, because as soon as they got the word, you had to go, and you didn't know who was going to get the assignment. But twice I got called for notification of next of kin. And I find after the first time I learned how to do that, because it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and how are you going to find these people? Go to the fire department, and they know where everybody is, and they took me to anyway. It's a thankless job, but it has to be done. And then the final one was widow's assistance, and there I was assigned to assist the widow of a soldier, and basically help her probate the estate and all that. And I knocked on the door, and she didn't know me at all. And anyway, I told her who I was, and she said, "Come on in." And I asked her where the documents, whatever she had, and she took me to the bedroom, and in a closet there on the floor was a shoebox full of papers. And so she let me take those, and anyway, that duty was a 3-month assignment, and it took it to get everything taken care of and get her stabilized and where she felt that she could carry on. And so that was, ROTC duty, but there were also other duties that we had as well. Well, they extended that to an extra year when I had to become the recruiter. So I spent 4 years. After 5 1-year tours, I got 1 4-year tour. But I really enjoyed it because of the athletics. I was part of the faculty, and I was also a student. I was taking courses at night. That's why I wanted the ROTC assignment.
And which school was this?
North Carolina State University, and that's where I met my wife. She was a senior, graduating senior. Well, I was about ready to get out of the military because of Vietnam. And I won't go into details there, but I would pretty much made my mind up to go. And she said something about, well, goodness, I really would like to see Germany. And I said, well, they don't know that I'm wanting to get out. You know, I said, they'll send me in a heartbeat. So we went to Germany next, and a great tour. And she was a school teacher, and they said that dependents could not get jobs teaching schools, and that's not right. So anyway, we traveled about 50 miles and found somebody and got her a job. Actually, she got 2 of them while she was there because I got promoted and moved to another location. But that tour, I was in military intelligence. It's a secondary branch to my infantry. So that whole 3 years that we were there, I worked in military intelligence at battalion level and at division level. And most of the time was spent up on the East German border. The 8th Infantry Division was responsible for the historic invasion corridor that comes from the Fulda Gap out of was then East Germany. And so we spent a lot of time up there, and I had to figure out, the complicated thing was we needed to look at it from their side of the border. And they wouldn't let us over there, of course, to do that. So we had to figure out how to do that, and we did it with aircraft with side-looking radar that could fly as close to the border as they could and look back toward Fulda and the route they would take. And one other thing that I picked up on just flying, flew over with helicopters all the time, route going up and back, and I noticed the difference in the rooftops. They were blackish gray, or they were terracotta, and they were mixed in all those villages in that valley that went along there. And I investigated that and found out, well, after World War II, so much of it was destroyed. The terracotta are the old buildings that are still there, and they're pretty flimsy, and and the new buildings were reinforced concrete, so with steel in them, and so it'd be more difficult to go through. So we figured out how to use that to our advantage, knowing that. I'm sure they knew it too, but they might not have thought about it. So that got into the plans, and that's basically what I did for 3 years there. And we came back. Well, while I was there, I was sort of avoiding Special Forces, which is my branch, because after Vietnam, there was a certain element of the Army that did not like the unconventional warfare. It just wasn't what they thought the military should be. And most of the officers that I went through the Special Forces officers course with either were deceased or they were no longer in the service. And so I couldn't find it. So I knew what was going on. It was just an adverse assignment. So I just avoided it. And that's why I went to Germany and so forth. But in the meantime, we had the debacle during the Carter administration over in the Iranian desert, and all of a sudden it was realized that we do need these special forces guys, and the word was out, it's safe to go home. So we coming back, I went straight to ask for and got Fort Bragg, where the 5th Special Forces Group was, and asked for assignment there, got it, and asked for a company command. I was a major, and majors normally are staff officers and don't command, but in Special Forces you can command a company. And so I got it, and I kept it for over 2 years, which is a little bit unusual. I think it had to do with my combat experience and the fact that my company had 6 Special Forces teams, 12-man teams. They could work independently. Well, 3 of them were oriented towards Iran, 3 of them towards Saudi Arabia. So 3 of them spoke Farsi and 3 spoke Arabic. And Iran at that time, after Carter's administration there, was really a hotbed, and it could go up any minute. So we had to be on alert pretty much at all times, especially those 3 Farsi-speaking teams. And my wife knew this. She knew all about it. We lived about 50 miles from the post, and she taught school in the public school system. She knew that if I didn't come home, don't worry about it. You know, that they would sooner or later get word to her, you know, somebody would. Mm-hmm. It took care of itself and all. So, you know, I came up missing for about three or 4 days. And she had to keep working. We had 2 children to take care of too. Anyway, we went into isolation, which is normal. You take the team, and what they wanted of me was they wanted me to select my 5 best Farsi speakers and my 5 best long-range communicators. Well, I had 2 long-range communicators on each of the 6 teams, and I had the senior ones in my little headquarters. So I did that, and so they were going to make up 5 teams. Would have a long-range communicator. They can communicate back to Fort Bragg on the set. They have those type of radios, and the Farsi speaker. And we didn't know exactly at that time what had happened, but we knew that we were going on a hostage rescue, and they were going to fly us to Italy as quick as they could get us there, and then they were going to take us out to the aircraft carrier somewhere in the Med, and then from there we'd go by helicopter, and then from helicopter there we were going to go into a soccer stadium in Tehran and drop us off there, where we would meet 5 Farsi citizens who were going to be our guides, and they were going to take each of the 4 teams. I was going to keep 1 team in the stadium there as a base, and then those 4 teams would go out with the guide and the Farsi speaker and the communicator, and pick up these oil employees and bring them back, and they'd take us out. I found out later, first of all, we were in the middle of training for this, and it got canceled. But because they didn't tell us exactly what it was going to be, and they didn't tell you what I found out later, that those particular oil workers worked for Ross Perot, and he finally ended up the money and paid the ransom, and got them out before we had to go in there. So that was an interesting little story.
Who was holding them hostage?
The Iranians. The Iranian. I think they're mostly students. They had rebelled and taken over the government, brought Khomeini back into the country. That was after the Shah of Iran was Carter, anyway, moved him to the States and put him in, gave him protection. And that's what was going on, a lot of upheaval there. I mean, they didn't know what was going to happen, really. We did our training, and every quarter we'd change. You'd have unit training, you'd have individual training where we'd get priority on any schools. We'd send guys to really good schools, and they always finished in the first, second, or third of the classes, or they'd be gone. No, not really, but they did. They just had that much pride. But anyway, the unit training, then I'll go back to the what we called, anyway, it was a work detail. Somebody had to do the work around it, so they'd split the units into 3s and rotate it, so there was always somebody taking care of the post, picking up the pine cones, as we said, and the cigarette butts and things like that. Anyway, we spent one month. We went out to Montana. And on these deals, the Air Force would send us anywhere in the world we want to go for free, because they got training. The catch was we had to jump out, and that wasn't so bad. But when you're coming back home and you've been out there in the boonies for a month and you're tired, you don't want to jump out of another airplane, but you have to. You have to jump when you come home. So we flew out. It was interesting flying out to Montana though, because it was a C-141, which is a jet that drops parachutes. And we flew nap of the earth most of the way, which meant we flew very low and through canyons and things like that on our way. And then it took hours to get out there, but about 15 minutes before they wake you up and get you up, say, get your chute on, it's fixing to be a green light, you got to jump. And what they do is they come in, and they were practicing real world, the Air Force was. And so they come in and they'd come up, and as soon as they hit that jump altitude, which wasn't very high, then the green light would come on and you'd jump. And I remember sleeping on a rack and then looking out there and seeing the side of a canyon on this side, and then it go back that way in the canyon. I mean, this is a huge airplane, you know. And I hope they know what they're doing. We came up over a bluff going into Montana, and there was a herd of antelopes there, and they just we were surprised that they would ever which way. But anyway, we got out, and we basically were practicing mountain climbing, and because there are a lot of mountains in Iran in particular, and also practicing and learning how to pack with horses, and not necessarily to ride them. We could, but the main thing was how do you pack them and how do you carry all that equipment we need to carry and so forth, and up and down where you're taking 2 steps up and 1 back and so forth. So it was good. We needed that kind of training. The next time we had unit training, we went to Utah. They said I couldn't find snow in December. We found it out in Utah at Snowbird. And it's a national forest out there, and we did cross-country skiing though. I assumed wrongly that all our guys could ski, you know. They did all right on the pulling Akio sleds, and it's a lot of work. That kind of skiing is work. It's, you know, getting one place to the other. And I wanted to give them a little reward and get them up on the slopes and let them downhill. So we made a deal where we got some brand new equipment and lift tickets before they really opened up. And snow was great, and all these moguls up there, and beautiful lodge, and hardly anybody there. And I put them on the bunny slope at first, and just to have them check out, each team leader had to check them all out and all that. And I went out to check; they were doing fine. I went back in and went back; they were gone. Now, where did a whole company go? You know, out here. And I went back in the lodge in this big glass window, and here they came. The whole company was coming down those moguls, just going every which way, crashing, burning. And I thought, oh, half of them are going to be broken legs and arms, and not a one of them. And I found out that half of them had never been on skis before. But that's the type of people you're dealing with. They can do whatever they have to do. And then finally we had to do the desert training because they've got desert in Iran and Saudi. And we went to New Mexico, and we went to California has, you know, Death Valleys out there. So we spent basically 2 months out there between the two of them, and just getting acclimated, seeing how to live out there. You have to live. You have to move during the night when it's cooler, and hold up under the mosquito, whatever you can get in the heat, and just rack out because you can't walk. Main problem is lack of water. Mm-hmm. But all of that, you've got to know all of that before you get committed somewhere, because it's too late then. There wasn't too many. They didn't make majors pick up pine cones. So every once in a while we'd have an assignment that they needed somebody details to do, and then one came in while I was available, and I had to go up to the Naval War College, I think it was. Anyway, it was up in Rhode Island. It was the Navy. I don't know what it was for, but I went up there, and they were going to run a war game in what looked like a high school gymnasium, but I was told that that building was used by the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. It was a historic building. And okay, I believe it, you know. And but they were going to run a naval war game, and they had, so the bleachers sitting looking down, and out on the floor there was going to be the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and they had their stocking feet on and moving ships around and stuff like that was the way. And they had computers running all this, but they had to visualize it. And they had 5 admirals that were there to run the war game. They were in commands, different commands. And there was, as I recall, we had 3 fleets that were American and 2 NATO, and there were 3 or 4, I think, Russian fleets. Anyway, that's what we were opposed to. And so they set it all up, and I was there representing the U.S. Army, one guy. And there was a Marine there, captain. He was representing the whole Marine Corps, one guy. The rest of them were Navy guys, and they were running around knowing whatever they were doing. We were trying to figure out what was going on. Well, they finally kicked it off. It was like, kickoff at a football game. And it didn't take 5 minutes for the results to come back from the computer. They had, what the plan called for was one, I think it was 3 KT subsurface nuclear device. And it was what amazed me was this was 1979, 80, somewhere in there, and that was the first time the Navy had ever run a war game with nukes after World War II. Okay, let's do it. And they did it, and in 5 minutes' time, the computer gave it the results back, and this blew your mind. It had sunk 2 Russian fleets, 1 of our fleets, and 1 of NATO's fleets, and had sent what we know now as tsunamis. At that time, it was a tidal wave from the coast from Norway to the tip of Africa, 50 miles inland. Can you believe that? 50 miles of tsunami that went 50 miles in, all that distance. But that's what that nuclear device did, according to what was the data that was in and played. Of course, there were 5 very unhappy admirals, and an Army guy and a Marine guy didn't need to be around there. So they let us go home early, and I don't know what happened, but it was going to take them 2 days to set it all up again. They were going to run it again. They had a glitch somewhere, obviously a glitch. That couldn't be accurate.
What did they hope that you would contribute to that?
Just
exercise?
In case they had a question about the Army's play, or just covering themselves, I guess. After the Special Forces, I went to assignment. I was trying to think. I was getting close to retirement, and my wife and I were thinking, well, where do we want to retire? I'm from Greenville, Alabama, and she was from Raleigh, North Carolina. And we were sort of looking at Greenville, and we was looking for. I had a couple of offers to be an advisor to the 2 places with the 20th Special Force Group, which I started with in the National Guard. One was in Huntsville, a great location. The other one in Cocoa Beach, Florida, another great location. We just I forget why we turned them down, but anyway, we did, and decided we'd go back. Michelle's my wife from Raleigh, and Fort Bragg's only 50 miles away, so we thought that was probably the best idea. And so that's where we needed to get back to Bragg instead of Fort Benning. And I had, I'm jumping over that, because we went to Fort Benning on assignment, thinking that we may go to Florida or Huntsville. I did not get the assignment I wanted. I wanted to be at the infantry board, which is a test board, and they test all sorts of equipment, tactics, everything that the Army gets, they test. And I was interested in that stuff. I thought maybe I could work in that field after I got out of service. I got diverted to a good friend of mine who was commanding the infantry officer basic course, and he wanted me to be his executive officer, which, okay, I can do that. And I wrote some manuals for him and things like that, and did menial XO duty and stuff. But finally, he let me go finally, but I got credit for being an executive officer of a battalion, so that was good. And I went to the infantry board, and I really got a plum and didn't realize it. I just finished the test officer course, so I knew a little bit about what I was doing. They sent me to that course for a week or two. But the assignment was, we were going to test, and I really wasn't sure what it all entailed, but we were going to be testing how to move the U.S. Army to the Middle East quickly, and using all of the latest equipment, weaponry, and everything that was on the board. Much of it was in different phases of completion. And I was going to be the test officer for it, so okay. And it was going to be out at Fort Lewis, Washington. And we were at Fort Benning, so there again, my wife and kids stayed at home, and I was going to be out there for 6 months. And they'd send me home for for a 3-day weekend once a month. Bless their hearts. but anyway, while I was out there, it was interesting. All the equipment, we tested dune buggies and all sorts of weapons on different things and things I'd never heard of and so forth. What we were actually testing, though, the computer back at Fort Benning was running all of this. And back then, this is 80s, early 80s, the infantry school's largest building on post there, the top floor of it was nothing but computers. But now they've got all that on everybody's desktop. But back then it was a whole building full that you couldn't see. You didn't even know it was up there. You had to take an elevator up there, and you had to have special permission to go up there now. But it was running this test. And now that it's over and all, I look back at, it was worthwhile because of what happened 10 years after that. And that was Desert Storm and Iraqi freedom. That, I guess they were anticipating that could happen. But what we found out, the computers found out, and they tried every way they could, we could not take one division, which was the 82nd Airborne Division, and move them in a couple of days because we didn't have enough airframes. They even commandeered all of the civilian aircraft. They're taking them all. They start off with the cargo planes, and they wound up with the passenger planes, and it never did work. You couldn't do it. It was impossible. Okay, so now we know what we're up against. And when Desert Storm came along, all of that equipment and so forth was in the desert. They built bunkers in the desert and put that equipment in there. So it was already there, ready for tanks, everything. It was ready to go. And I remember when I had that Special Forces company, I sent numerous teams, 1, 2, 3-man team. Normally they were weapons specialists over there to teach how to use all of these tow missiles and things like that. That's what they were doing. And that's when they came back, they told me, well, all this stuff's out in the desert there and in bunkers and all. No, I didn't know that. Nobody else knows it either. So keep your mouth shut. But it was there when we needed it, and it worked. I mean, it was so successful. The world had never seen something like that so quickly to defeat a country on their home turf like that as quickly as we did. That was probably the best part of that assignment at Fort Benning. Then my final assignment, by then, as I said, I was looking for retirement and all. I needed an assignment back at Fort Bragg. We decided we were going to live in Raleigh. So I went back to my military intelligence and got an assignment there as the SSO, which is Special Security Officer for all of Fort Bragg. And what that entailed, we had a skiff, which is a vault, basically for securing intelligence. And it was in a basement of the headquarters building, that sort of thing. They have them everywhere that they need them. But we were responsible 24/7 to deliver eyes-only traffic to all the general officers on post. And aside from Pope Air Force Base, which is adjacent, they had their own skiff and so forth, so we didn't service them, but we had the 18th Airborne Corps, which is the standby reserve that we had then and still do today, and the 82nd Airborne is reaction force. They're there. Those general officers, the JFK Center for Special Warfare for all special forces throughout the world was there. I think they're somewhere else now, but they were there then. And then the 5th Special Forces Group, which was the biggest group they had. So those general officers, and I'd never thought about it, but I had specialists who did this professionally. You know, I was the officer in charge, but they were the ones that actually, occasionally I would have to do it, but mostly they would go out at night, knock on the general's door, and he would come to the door. Couldn't be his wife. He'd come, invite him in while he's in his pajamas and all. He sits down and reads whatever the message is. He has to memorize it, because he can't chew it up and swallow it. He can't take any notes, and that to me was pretty amazing, because some of that was lengthy and very technical stuff, some new material that they weren't there, but they basically were used to it and were able to do that. And so that was an interesting assignment, because I was privy to just about everything that was going on. I had to ride herd on to make sure they didn't do all these things that we're hearing that they're doing up there in Washington about, security clearance and all that. No, we didn't. We held their feet to the fire. That was my final assignment, and I'd had some difficulties after Vietnam. I don't know. I had migraine headaches, and my knees were I was just worn out. I had 20 years of active Army and 8 years of National Guard before that. So that's 28 years of pretty much continuous service of one form or another. My bod was sort of wearing thin, and like MacArthur said, old soldiers, there's a poem, old soldiers never die, they just fade away. And I said, I'm sort of like MacArthur. I'm having trouble with the fading part. I just don't want to go yet, but I got to. And now I'm 100% disabled. I've got some spinal problems. I was still jumping out of airplanes at 44. And well, there was a couple of times when airborne, and this is interesting too. They teach you in 3 weeks what they can teach you in 3 days, because they instill it in you where it's all reflex action, and that's what it takes. They teach you how to land in 5 points of performance. That's your toes, and you don't look down at your toes. You look at the horizon and gear as to when, and concentrate on your toes. So the minute your toes touch, then you start swaying. Depending on which way the wind's blowing and your chute's going, you turn forward, front, in whichever direction. Better get the right one. and then you start your fall with your feet together on your lower calf, and then your buttocks muscle. That's all muscles. You want to stay away from bone, and then you what they call a push-up muscle, which is this muscle back here, and you duck your head and hold your hands in, and you roll in and you roll up, and if you do it correctly, your chute will have not collapsed at all. And many times, especially if you're jumping on ice, you better do it right, and it's called a parachute landing fall, PLL. So you could do it. You could do it right. And the only way a lot of times you knew that you would ever hit the ground. This is how well that works and how good it works. And for us old folks, it's a good thing to learn. I'm serious. You could learn to go to your knees, instead of falling from the top. Just when you feel like you fix the fall, collapse your knees and start rolling your body around off of those muscles and protect your head. I went with a friend of mine with the 20th National Guard at Wilmington, North Carolina, at an Army airfield, and they were having a jump, and we could check out as many chutes as we could jump. 4, you were just about totally worn out with 4. So I took 4. I wound up using only 1, but but anyway, we went and they had an old Korean War plane, which is called a flying boxcar. It's a C-119. And you sort of dangle in the middle and the wings out here, and it's got twin fuselage, and you sort of bounce in the middle. Well, we got on it and we were ready to fly up and come back, and they were going to drop us on the airfield. Plenty of lush grass out there, but there was also concrete runways laid out in a triangle like they did in World War II. That's where it came from. It was used as a training field in World War II. We got at the end of the runway and we took off, and he couldn't make it. He had to pull back on it and hold it back to, he didn't have enough airspeed to get up there. So I thought, good, he stopped it, let's get off of this thing. Nope, he took it, went back, and here he came again, and we got off it. I said, okay, you got us up here, now let's get out of here. So he went around, and when I went out, you always check your canopy, check your chute. You go out in a tight wad so you stay together, and then the rip cord is attached to the plane. It pulls your chute, so you don't have to do that. You got a reserve that you can pull if you need it. And the first thing you do once you're out and you're sort of free is look up and see your canopy and make sure, check it out. And I did that. I didn't see any holes. But these chutes were steerable chutes, the MC1, which was a new type chute. I'd jumped it before. But it has an orifice in the rear that gives you 13 additional knots speed, lateral speed. Well, so I had that much speed, and all of a sudden I noticed I'm falling quicker than the other people. I've already checked everything, and so somebody hollered at me, and I looked up, and there was another hole that is the same size as the orifice that's in there. So that's another 13 knots. Now I'm going 32 knots. And I looked down to see where that concrete was, and I saw it, and I said, I don't want to hit that concrete. So the only thing I could do to get over the concrete was to do what they had taught us to do. And you have to do this all in a millisecond. You got to respond. You don't think about it. Is to grab the cords, the riser cords, and pull up into the skirt of the chute and pull it into your face. And that picks up more air so that you can go laterally. Now I've already got 32 knots. Now I'm up here, and I've got the skirt of it in my face, and I've got another probably 32 knots. I'm moving, and I'm thinking then, okay, you better make the best PLF you've ever done. The first thing, you better get over that concrete. Well, I missed the concrete about 10 yards, and I did one of those PLFs where when I stood up, I didn't even realize I'd ever been on the ground, but I could look on my uniform and see the grass stains on the 5 points of performance there. And I walked off, nobody said a word. But I said, I don't think I want to jump again today. So we retired in Raleigh, and so it all worked out, and all in all, a good career. A lot of stories.
Do you keep in touch with people from the
Yeah,
service?
as a matter of fact, I've been talking to a couple of them this week. There's a Ranger Rendezvous, which is it's the regular Rangers at Fort Benning host it, but all the Rangers from the various conflicts, like Merrill's Marauders, there were like 6 of them left a year before last. The COVID got last year, stopped it. We didn't have any rendezvous last year. But we had 6 2 years ago. Now I think it's 2 left. And so, that's normal attrition. There's no World War II left. And then we have a small contingent of Rangers. There wasn't many in Korea, but there was some. There was three battalions, I think. And then ours. And now I understand we've got them, of course, the active duty, and they're beginning to grow. So we'll go for a week and have a good time, and then my Ranger company that I commanded, Echo Company of 75th, we have ours, we're going to have it here in Mobile, as a matter of fact.
Really?
Next year. No, this year in October. Yeah, it's coming up in October. One of our guys lives over in Mobile, and he's sort of sponsoring. I've been trying to help him. He said he doesn't need any help, so okay, go ahead. But it looks good. He and his wife have gotten a hold of a lot of people that we lost them, but they found them, and so it's going to be interesting to see how many shows up for that. And then my rifle company, we meet in September, I believe, back out at St. Louis. So we'll see how that goes. We're all getting older, and now we've had a year off from this, so it's going to be interesting to see if it falls apart, if it gets stronger, or what happens. But it's good to see them again.
Throughout all these different assignments that you've had, did you have anything with you that was like a good luck charm, or?
Well, when I was in harm's way, which really wasn't that much time, I carried a pistol. I carried it in my pocket, and that was my last defense. I was telling somebody the other day about that pistol, but the one I had in Vietnam was a stainless steel, 38 special, but it was in my pocket, so it didn't matter what happened to my equipment or what, I always had that, so that was my good luck charm. No, I really, though, seriously, the good Lord looked out for me. He just had to. And I understand that now, probably more than then. I couldn't think about it. That was a good thing about command. I commanded in 12 months of combat. Well, I had so much to do and think about, to worry about that sort of thing. Now, I'm not saying that you don't get scared. You do. You have to just keep on keeping on. My radio operator one night, I usually took the last watch. Well, he woke me up about 2 hours before my watch, and I was having trouble. I was groggy and all, but anyway, the starlight goes where we can see green at night, but you can see it. And he said, "Look, look, look." And his eyes were like that, he was looking at me, and I'm looking there, and yep, there they were, but they weren't coming our way, and they were going toward the Vietnamese. The South Vietnamese had a position down there, and they were going toward that way. And I was thinking, now, do I use my artillery? I might hit those Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese. Anyway, I just in a flash, and there again, a millisecond, you're thinking about this. Luckily, I think that was the right decision, because about 30 minutes later, they hit them. They ran into each other, and everything happened down there. But anyway, back to my tailor. He was watching me. We all get frightened. Hey, I'm sure he was too. He was on watch by himself. He was looking at me, and he said, "Captain," said, "you're scared." I said, you think I'm stupid? Of course I'm scared. Yeah. And I said, what you do is not what you are. But yeah, that happens. One night I'd always position myself behind the machine gun. I would be with a platoon, one of my 3 platoons, and I would get, because that was in the apex of the ambush, and we ambushed just about every night. We worked all day and nights with very little rest. But I would just, that's where I'd set up to lay down. About 8 o'clock, I went to sleep because I had to get up early. I got up ahead of everybody else, so I'd go and sleep. Well, anyway, I knew the machine gun was there. It was a canal that came to a T shape. And anyway, all of a sudden, boom, and I looked up, and there was all this stuff. The sky was lit up, and this stuff was falling down in my face and all that. And I mean, all this, like I said, in a millisecond, I just see that like it. And I'm turned over with my hand clawing the ground, trying to dig a hole, And then all of a sudden, I said, "Dummy, you better find out what's going on." So I went running over the machine gun, and that little fellow, he was afraid I was going to get mad at him. He said I couldn't. He was a short fellow, and said I couldn't get the muzzle down. I had to stand up, and when he did, he stood up, and he must have hit an explosive, probably a B-40 rocket, because it blew. It was a sampan in the canal, and blew it up, and I don't know. Anyway. And but he was more concerned. He wasn't scared. He was anyway. Those things you do, but like I said, you trust in God to take care of those things, and it's amazing how after it was all over and all these years, I don't have PTSD, but I do. Everybody does that was in combat. It takes 8 soldiers to support one guy in combat, so everybody doesn't have PTSD. But most who were really in combat, you can't help it to. It's just like what I'm relating to you, all these memories and all. Well, I don't have much control over them when you get older or when you get out on civilian and all, and they come back at night and they come out from anywhere. You don't know, and you can't get rid of them until you wake up the next day. And that's PTSD, and it's been with all wars, I think, forever. I know World War I and II. I had a friend, his daddy's friend actually. I was trying to help him get some help. That he had it back in World War II, going storming those beaches and so forth. He was a Brown automatic rifleman, which was only had 20 rounds, but they used that as a sniper rifle. I didn't know that. And his job, and he had 2 guys to spot and carry ammunition for him, but his job was to shoot people. They used him as a sniper, shoot people for, I think he said they averaged 28 days on an island. And he came back and built up a business and built up a farm, had a farm too, and did a lot of things. But that stuff it didn't bother him until he was in his 80s. And it started coming back, and he was having a problem and trying to get VA help for him. So that was World War II. And World War I, same thing. I know a guy that he was a civic leader when he left. When he got back, he was he was a drunk, basically. So those things have to. I don't think society really still understands that, and a lot of people probably have taken advantage of the PTSD thing. Like I said, I've got PTSD, but it doesn't bother me other than it keeps me awake sometimes. I wish it would go away, thing. But I think everybody has things that you wonder that maybe it was an occurrence during the day that went wrong or something, and you forgot about it. Well, and you wake up in the middle of the night, it's on your mind, and you want to go away. You leave me alone.
Mm-hmm. I think your recollections are wonderful.
Well, I hope that's helpful. That's healthy.
And we want to thank you for taking the time to be part of our
project. Thank you for asking me.
And as always, we thank you for your service.
Thank you. I'd do it again, I'm sure.